All right, welcome to Chapter 4 here. This piggybacks off of the book, if we were following along with that. If not, no worries. We'll get into details here about the necessary skill set. And this gets into what it takes to be a leader, the skills that are necessary for good leadership, and identify crucial skills, understand what those skills look like, how to implement them in an organization's vision. We might have already have experience doing that, and I'll draw on some examples to hopefully get us thinking along that line as well. And then develop recommendations regarding how to acquire leadership skills. This is something that's continually in need. Organizations in sport and in general, in any other discipline, really are always demanding or seeking out ways to continue to develop it. And some of the ways that we start to see some of that through a little bit more one-on-one development or group development, and some different ways that are really doing some really cool things. There's some organizations out there that take it a little bit more seriously than others, and eventually it shows as well with how the organization operates and is able to replace leaders throughout the organization too. And lastly, establish an understanding of important leadership competencies, and that's something that's going to piggyback into what we talk about throughout the rest of the course as well. So leadership skills that we tend to, I wouldn't say take for granted, but are kind of always a little bit out there in the general public. These are leadership skills you could probably pull somebody off the street and, in a business context, ask them, hey, what are leadership skills that you typically associate with a business person? And a lot of times you'll hear, create this lifelong relationship with customers, which is just good customer relationship, provide those customers with good customer service, achieve some kind of either a change of revenue or a certain level of revenue, create different marketing campaigns if they're in marketing, and then develop and rely on leaders who can display expertise in the vision that they're trying to lay out. And that can mean a lot of things. Now, somebody off the street may not say that verbatim. They might say, oh, I want somebody, or I think a good leader is somebody who takes care of the customers, takes care of their own people in the organization, shows innovation, which is that creativity, develops an organization, takes it to new heights, especially nowadays with a lot of the tech companies and how those are getting integrated in sport. Innovation is kind of the name of the game. And change in general is the name of the game. Leaders are agents of change. As well as, hey, at some point, major or minor, leaders are going to have to cope with and lead through some kind of crisis or conflict. It could be organizational conflict or crisis. It could be societal. It could be, a department within an organization. They also have to maintain interpersonal skills of communication, which we'll get into a little bit more, but also piggybacks off of how to cope with a crisis or cope with a conflict. Good communication is a huge, huge part of that. Also, potentially, you have to hire the right people. And then they also have to address and forge through change. You can't hide from it. And like I said, one of the key, it's a cliche, but it's very true, is that leaders are agents of change. For general leadership skills or leadership styles, I changed it to skills, I think, just to avoid confusion from the leadership styles that we had covered previously. So I prefer these general overarching skills, and each can kind of have its own little spokes underneath the umbrellas here. But crafting a vision, communicating, coping with those crises and conflicts, and then addressing and forging change. Those are really, that pretty much boils everything down from the previous slides, as well as sets up what we're talking about here. Now, this is something that regardless of context, it could be sport, it could be another industry, it could be different levels of sport. These are leadership skills that will span any organization. So if we master these or continue to work at these, we've got a really good foundation to be a good leader with these leadership skills, no matter what we're working with, where we're working at all. That could be intercollegiate sport, could be high school sport, could be professional, could be going from working in the athletic department. Maybe we're working, transfer to just the general university marketing department instead of handling marketing for athletics. All these things are still going to hold true and still give us a good foundation we can build other skills upon, or we can tailor it to whatever the organization we're working in would need. So what's a vision? Beyond what's on the slide here, I really like to depict a vision as a question. Where are we going? That's what this really boils down to. Vision is that kind of idea for future success, or it's that direction, and it's going to be what we follow. It's going to be how we get to where we want to go. And leadership, I like this little quote here in this little graphic, because we tend to hear vision and mission statements. Leadership's that capacity to translate vision into reality. So it takes in a considerable amount of time, creativity, and the ability to kind of peer into the future and say, hey, maybe individually, we can do this individually as well. Where do we want to be 5 years from now? As an organization, where do we want to be 5 years from now? As a team, as a student, as a person, as an industry professional. And to really get a crystal clear picture of where we want to be, it takes time. It's not something that you can just kind of spend an afternoon in a coffee shop and jot some things down in a journal and be done. It takes time, takes experience. It might take asking mentors or other people for help and input. But when a leader is trying to orchestrate a vision for an organization, they really have to think deeply about what that success is going to mean, how that success is going to be measured, not just for goals, but also for what other people are going to want, and take that in consideration if need be. But it's really that capacity. We need to create the vision, but then we also have to be able to communicate and translate this into a reality here. That's what separates a mission statement from a vision statement. Vision statement, where are we going? A mission statement, who we are. It defines us in the present. It's present seeking, whereas vision is forward seeking or future seeking. So how do we get that? How do we translate that vision into reality? Well, part of that is kind of this conceptualization. This is a process that leaders or other members of the organization that might help them evaluate the sport industry, take a look at the environment, the trends, what's going on here, and then basically set a future direction or that vision for the organization. And that's how we get pie in the sky, big picture, dream board, ideas on a whiteboard, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you've done to maybe set a goal or illustrate a goal or illustrate a vision. How do we get that into action here? Is this conceptualization? So that process here takes time. So that's why I said previously, it takes time. We have to evaluate. If we're general manager of a baseball team, and right now baseball has gone through a reckoning of sorts with the analytics, and now there's the argument: are we going too far with analytics? Because now we've got pace of play issues. Now we've got huge shifts out in a field. We've got guys at the plate who pretty much swing for the fence. So they're striking out, they're walking, or they're hitting a home run. There's not much in between. Another thing, as just reading the other day, actually, is a write-up, an investigation into the notion of pitchers not going through a lineup for a third time, but their velocity is up, and so we think that that we're saving innings, so Tommy John surgery and other injuries should be down. There's not really that big of a difference compared to 10 or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, in the prevalence of Tommy John or some of the other injuries. So that conceptualization that the industry has gone through, that vision of being analytically driven, is something that some general managers and some teams now are starting to give a little bit of pause of, or certainly some people that are trying to advise Major League Baseball. So they're kind of going through this process right now, looking at what that industry environment looks like, those trends with the analytics. Is it going too far? Is there a way to bring it back so that there's a happy medium between being smart, but also making sure that we're keeping the fans engaged, making sure that dynamics of a team are still engaged as well, that we're keeping the players and the athletes happy as well within the sports. We're not losing stars, or we're not losing players from a team. If we bring it back to being the general manager of a specific team, these are things that we have to evaluate. How far into the analytics realm do we go? Do we go all in and make every decision off of it, or is it 50-50? What's that future look like for the organization? Baseball's a great example for this. I really like to use it because you have the Major League Baseball level, then you have AAA, AA, and Single A. So you have the most robust minor league system. And so that in itself is an interesting case of vision for the future. You've got it sitting right there, but you have it sitting at multiple levels of development. And so that conceptualization takes time, especially for a general manager or a GM. It takes foresight. So this is a competency or a skill that basically allows a leader to take what they've learned from past experiences, good or bad, as well as take a beat on present situations, the current state of things, and then project those consequences or those outcomes that a decision that we have to make today can have in the future. So foresight is, if you've taken a finance course and you've talked about the time value of money, that might sound a little familiar because, what's a dollar 10 years from now worth today? Well, this is basically foresight from a leadership perspective. This is, what's that decision 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, or a season from now, or 10 months from now going to look like then compared to today? What's that decision looking like today compared to the future here? So, time value of money, future value of money, present day value of money, being able to translate that between current and future values of a dollar. The same thing with a decision. What's that decision today? What's that going to look like? What are those consequences or outcomes going to look like in the future? It takes foresight to try to have as best a guess or best look at that future consequence, future outcome as accurately as possible. And I guess, if we're guessing at the foresight, we're in trouble. We want to have some kind of confidence that's saying, hey, based off of the past and present, we predict or we believe that this decision is going to lead to outcomes A, B, and C. We don't want to guess. We want to make sure that we're making informed decisions and have informed foresights. Stewardship, this is an aspect that kind of piggybacks a little bit off of our leadership styles that we've talked about as well. Making decisions with the best interests of the organization in mind. And this really comes into play with taking our own personal wants and desires out of the equation and really putting forth the decision and the actions for the outcome that's going to lead to the best for the organization. So we want to make sure that that's at the forefront here. Capability to succeed. Next, we've got, it's not just a skill to assess people here, but the honest assessment of abilities, including strengths and weaknesses of the organization as a whole. If it's an organization that's been around a while, that means that we've got a lot of history. We've got a lot of rapport, potentially with customers, which can be good. On the flip side, if we're an organization that's been around a long time, we might be stuck in our ways, which could be bad. Not necessarily, but could mean that we miss out on an innovative trend that could really help us, could create more efficiency, could exploit a loophole. To use Major League Baseball again for an example, the teams that could match the ability and the skills to mine data through analytics, as well as put up a little bit more payroll than, say, like the Oakland A's, who kind of had the claim to fame through Moneyball and all that, but didn't have the payroll to back it up fully. Those teams that had both were ahead of the trend, but some of the teams that have been around a while and are a little bit more staunchly against analytics and that crazy way of thinking, well, now they're trying to scramble and make up the ground that all these other teams put it, kind of laid out in front of them because they adapted it sooner. They're a little bit more forward thinking. They weren't as stuck in their ways. So capability to succeed here from a leadership perspective is being able to not just put that into action for individuals and help assess our followers and their development, but develop and assess the organization as a whole. Now, segue into what a follower is. This is usually somebody who obviously is following a leader. But really, it gets into somebody who's bought in, and their identity is that, hey, we're not just a follower. I'm not just blindly following somebody else. But part of my identity, part of what I'm staking as my well-being and my development is to follow this other person, follow this leader or leadership group. We're a part of a group or an organization. And the assessment of our significance, our values, our career, a lot of times, is based on that membership and where we stand within the group too. So if we're a follower and we think we're next in line, we probably have a pretty high thought of, okay, we've been a follower for a while, we've got these experiences and skills. I've been a follower for this leader for quite some time, and so I should be next in line, or I should be able to be a leader soon, whatever that might look like here. So a follower goes into that identity, as well as some positional aspects here too. But we'll get a little bit more into that a little later. Parts of listening, so this gets into communication. We'll talk a little bit more about communication separately, so we won't spend as much time here. But just know that listening includes a lot of different ways. It's not just paying attention, it's not just paying attention, but it's also actively listening, actively paying attention, keeping an open mind, making sure that we're reflecting throughout a conversation or reflecting throughout a development process, being able to clarify. Listening and communication specifically needs to be a two-way street. So we need to be able to ask questions to gain clarity, and then be able to summarize. If we've listened well, we should be able to summarize things. For example, if we're listening well throughout these video lectures, we should be able to, at the end of these slides, jot down a couple of those key points, or jot down some of the high points that I tend to spend a little bit more time on, or say, hey, this is an important note, or something to that effect here. Active listening, as mentioned just a minute ago, leaders can identify and deal with the areas of confusion and uncertainty, and they show that they care for their followers' concerns when they're actively listening. So this is a good way to also acquire valuable information. It helps to improve communication with followers. It helps to improve that buy-in as well. If a follower goes to a leader with a concern or a question about clarity and they just dismiss it, well, that follower's probably not going to feel real important. They're probably not going to feel as though they fit in. They're probably not going to feel as though they're respected. So we want to make sure we're in that active listening mode. It goes for the follower too. Next, emotional intelligence. We've probably heard quite a bit about this. This is something that's really become in vogue in the last couple of years, but it's been around a lot longer. It's just really become a little bit more popularized recently. But it's basically how we understand, manage, and are aware of not only our own emotions, but the emotions of those around us as well, and how that can affect how we interact with each other. Self-awareness, this comes into some of that emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is that process where we know ourselves. This comes in a little bit from the authentic leadership aspect that I mentioned before from some of our previous chapters. And this is knowing ourselves, knowing our strengths, weaknesses, our own opportunities, our own threats, as well as our own emotions. So within emotional intelligence, self-awareness is huge. That's kind of the first step. We got to be aware of our own selves and how we're acting or behaving and how that might influence others, or how others' behaviors might influence our own behaviors, emotions, and self-awareness as well. Self-regulation, and this kind of self-explanatory here, just can we control and adjust our actions here, especially for a leadership standpoint. Everybody's going to watch. Something happens, what's the leader going to do? You have to self-regulate sometimes. It might be really easy to get emotional and worked up and go into some kind of rampage. It's probably not going to be the best bet. There's a time and a place. We see coaches certainly do this sometimes to get a team fired up. And that depends on the situation. Might have good results, might not. But again, generally, you don't want to see a general manager just blowing up their team after every single loss all the time, or swearing and cursing in front of the media all the time either. They may want to, but we got to regulate that. So the self-awareness versus regulation aspects here, control acquired through both of these allow a leader to be authentic in their actions. So again, like I just mentioned, it gets into that authentic leadership aspect here. It also helps to earn followers' trust, because we're not up and down, we're not all over the place with our emotions, we can be even keeled. This doesn't mean we don't show emotions or that we don't sometimes show that we can uh, be affected by decisions or affected by outcomes. Show some humanity here and there. But it also means that we're not flipping chairs every single time something little goes wrong. And this also helps to enhance communication within the organization because people know we can go to a leader with problems. They're not going to blow up at us, or it's not going to storm off. We can have a friendly conflict or healthy conflict and be okay. We can also take them to good news and know that's not going to get overblown either or turn into something weird. We know that they're going to stay pretty even keeled. And this takes time, it takes practice. Next, we get into motivation. We'll spend a little bit more time in future chapters on motivation, but just briefly, this is affected by the quality of experience that a follower has within a group, affected by a leader or its leadership. And there's a lot of factors that have a play into motivation here. It's not just one. It's not just, oh, I really love my job or like working for a leader or following that person or whatever the case is. It's a lot of things. It could be job satisfaction. Could be effort. Is my effort being recognized? Is there perceived equity? If I put in more effort or perform better, is there eventually going to be some kind of payoff? Is there a motivation to keep going at this level? And that ties into organizational commitment. If we're motivated and all those things are in check, we're probably going to stay with an organization more often than not, or more likely than not. And all these boil into a positive experience, hopefully. Empowerment, and this is, again, something to do with servant leadership from the previous chapters here. Just how much does everybody believe, or does a person believe that they have within them, within their grasp, within their control, the ability to achieve their own vision, goals, enact policies, or from a leadership standpoint, the organization's vision, goals, and policies? Can they do what they believe is appropriate, what they believe is needed to do to achieve these things? That's empowerment. Do we have that feeling of, hey, we can go out there and get it done however we see fit? Then empathy. This ties into a little bit for the emotional intelligence as well. And it shows understanding, consideration, as well as respect for somebody else's issues, troubles, concerns. Somebody raises a question, raises concerns about a decision, they're just not going to get laughed at and laughed out of the room or disregarded. A leader with empathy is going to take the time, understand it, and talk with them. And also be aware of their emotions that might be generated from some kind of conflict or crisis, or maybe it's a misunderstanding of a decision or whatever the case is. So that empathy is important to make sure that followers or anybody else go to a leader and they know that they're not just going to get disregarded completely. So necessary skill set, all that boils down to how to be a good leader. Like I said, these 4 leadership skills, this would be a good important slide to hone in on. And this branched off into the rest of the slides, but these are things that ourselves, as you continue your journey through becoming a leader, we can try to work on. We can always work on communication. We can always work on crafting a vision. An easy way to start with that is to set our own goals. Goal setting for us personally, a year out or 2 years out or whatever the case is, those are the same skills that we need to translate as a leader for an organization or a group. Coping with crises and conflict. Those are ever going to be present. No matter what organization we're at, there's going to be some kind of crisis or some kind of conflict. Think in our day-to-day life, we probably have some kind of conflict or crisis that happens, maybe not every day, but happens regularly enough, or could be. Maybe on the way into work or way into campus, somebody cuts us off. That's certainly a conflict, but are we going to let that hang over us for the rest of the day? Or addressing and forging change. Again, think of all the revolving skills beyond leadership that we need in the sport industry now. It's constantly changing and evolving. The sooner we address it and forge ahead with it, the better off we'll be, the better equipped we'll be to get a job in the industry as well, versus just saying that, no, we're going to stick to the old way of thinking. We've seen that happen, and we usually see organizations that stick to the old way of thinking usually get passed by pretty quickly. So that's a wrap for our chapter here.